Well, hey there, good morning, and welcome to Graceway. Jeff is going to be up in a moment to share this week's message entitled Helping or Hurting the Kingdom from Luke chapter 9. But first, we wanted to let you know about a few upcoming events happening here at Graceway. Be sure to join us for our annual Christmas Eve service. Our theme this year is 'Twas the Night Before Christmas, and this classic service is going to feature a night of Christmas music in a setting perfect for the whole family, and the service begins at 9 p.m. on December the 24th. Hey, if you're new to Graceway, or if you'd like to find out how you fit into the Graceway family and in God's global mission, be sure to attend our First Steps class. This 2-week course starting January 5th at 9 a.m. in room 102 covers Graceway's core beliefs and ministry philosophy. We'll also assist you in finding a place of service based on your interests, gifts, and existing relationships. And you don't need to register to attend this class. But immediately following our First Steps class, our Directions class will begin on January 19th, and this relational study is designed to help direct your spiritual growth and provide a deeper understanding of the basics of the Christian faith. And this is a great way to meet people, develop friendships through biblical community, and find your place to serve here at Graceway. So for more info and to sign up for this class, go to our website, visit graceway.org, and click on the Directions button. Control-Alt-Delete on your computer allows you to pause your computer and kill any of those out-of-control actions that are killing your performance on your PC. And this year at Winterfest, we're asking our middle school and high school students to perform a Control-Alt-Delete as well. Control the inputs, alter their point of view, and delete the past. Winterfest is going to run from January 17th to 19th, and it's $55 per student. For more information and to sign up, go to visitgraceway.org/Winterfest. Hey, back in November, we introduced our new Zumba classes on Monday and Thursdays, and they've been a great success. And so in January, we're going to kick these classes off again on Mondays and Thursdays from 6 p.m. till 7 p.m. And these cost $5 per class, or you can purchase a 6-month pass for only $50. And you can learn more and purchase your 6-month pass at visitgraceway.org/Zumba. You know, giving our new visitors a great experience is very important to us, and that's why we've sectioned off a portion of our closest parking lot to let our first-time visitors find a spot right away and get into the service. But we need your help, so we're looking for Gracewayers who can endure the harsh breath of old man winter and greet our new visitors with a smile. We'll also need you to escort them from our reserved parking spots to the warmth and comfort of our Graceway VIG counter. And if you're interested in this new ministry, fill out the card in the seat back in front of you, circle C for cold, and then put the card in the offering bucket or in the offering box in the back of the auditorium. Hey, again, thanks for joining us today. And if you'd like more information about any of these events or other activities, we encourage you to take a look at the bulletin or visit our website at visitgraceway.org. You can also check out our iPhone and Android apps as well.
All right, good morning, y'all. My name is Jeff, and I'm the guy that was supposed to be here last week but wasn't. Got caught in an ice storm in Dallas, and I learned from that if an ice storm ever happens in Dallas, not even Santa Claus is getting in or out. Just doesn't happen. So give a shout out to Kent for filling in for me last week. He did a great job, right? Yeah. And kind of nice to be able to call somebody at the last minute and say, okay, I'm stuck at the airport in Dallas, and I think I'll be home before spring, but I'm not sure. Can you fill in for me? So I really, really appreciate that. Well, this morning we want to give one more shot at our study in the Gospel of Luke chapter 9. We've been studying the Gospel of Luke for a long time now, and I want to do one more study, and the next week we're going to take a holiday break. I'm going to be talking about the Christmas season itself next Sunday morning, but this morning I want us to go to Luke chapter 9, and we'll begin in verse 46. And as you find your place, let me just kind of throw out a question to you that I want to see if we can answer today. Are you helping or hindering the kingdom of God? Which is it in your case? Because we're going to see this morning the disciples of Jesus being more of a hindrance than they are a help. And I'm thinking if it could happen to them, it could happen to us. And what really is it that stops churches from being what God wants them to be. Because let's face it, a lot of times we're not. So what happens? Where is the disconnect? And how can we avoid that? I believe the answer, or at least one of the answers, is in the passage that we want to look at this morning. And so the situation that is unfolding here in Luke chapter 9, Jesus has been up on the mountain with his three closest friends, Peter, James, and John, three of his 12 disciples, and he has been transfigured in their presence. He just totally morphs into the way that he was before he was born as Jesus in the manger in Bethlehem. And so it is the original mountaintop experience for these guys. And you would think that they would come down off the mountain full of faith, and they came down off the mountain faithless. In fact, it seems like they're worse now in their lack of understanding than they were before. What's up with that? Why does this happen? And what's going on? And not only that, as Jesus begins to clearly tell them, and this is what we saw a couple of weeks ago, Jesus begins to clearly tell them, look guys, I'm going to be delivered to be crucified. I'm going to die. And he's telling them this because he's saying to them, look, if you follow me, you're going to have to take up your cross daily as well. In other words, you follow me, it's going to cost you as well. He's leading them into suffering and pain. Doesn't exactly sound like the message that we sometimes hear in churches today. Just put your faith in Jesus and your life will be a miracle and nothing bad will ever happen, and then it does and you're wondering, okay, what hit me and why and what did I do wrong? Well, what we sometimes do wrong is not going back and analyzing what did Jesus really say, and that's what we want to do this morning. So let's pick it up in Luke chapter 9, verse 46, right after Jesus has announced to them that he's going to be delivered to die. Then there arose a reasoning among them, which of them should be the greatest? Wait. Jesus just said, guys, I'm going to die. I'm going to Jerusalem, and they're going to deliver me to be crucified. So how do they respond to that? They're over here in a little huddle, buzzing about who's going to be the greatest among them. Verse 47, and Jesus, perceiving the thought of their heart, took a child and set him by him and said unto them, whoever shall receive this child in my name receives me. And whosoever shall receive me receives him that sent me. For he that is least among you all, the same shall be great. I think there's pretty obviously a communication breakdown between Jesus and his closest followers. And I know that if you're honest like me, you have experienced at times communication breakdowns between you and God. It happens to all of us. What causes that? What's going on here? And why are these guys not understanding this? Now let me just throw out some givens. Here's what we know. They are believers. They believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the Anointed One. They really believe that. In fact, they have left everything to follow him. But it's pretty obvious they've got a long way to grow and a long way before they really understand all of the implications and all of the depth of what it means that Jesus is the Messiah. Now, look at verse 45. This is a verse that we saw a couple of weeks ago. This sets the story up that we're looking at today. But they understood not the saying that he was going to be delivered to death. And it was hid from them that they perceived it not, and they feared to ask him of that saying. Okay, let's think about that for a second. These guys have been with Jesus now for a couple of years. Why are they afraid to talk to him? Why couldn't they just go to him and say, Jesus, would you go through that again? I'm not sure I'm feeling what you're saying. Would you explain this? When you talk about being delivered up into the hands of your enemies and all this type, what do you really mean? But they don't go to him. Instead, they get off to the side and they begin to buzz among themselves. Why do they do that? Now, before we become judgmental of them, like, well, if I was there, I would have done that. Yeah, we probably would. And here's why. Here's what's going on. What Jesus is saying about being delivered to death, and specifically to death on the cross, is pretty close to being incomprehensible to them. There is nothing in their background or experience or knowledge base that would equip them to really get a handle on what Jesus is saying. And here's the reason. We've got people in our church that come from cultures like this that anthropologists or sociologists call shame-honor societies, where everything is about bringing honor to yourself and your family and your community, and everything is about avoiding at all costs bringing shame to yourself or to your family or to your people. And there are still many, many cultures like that in the world today. These guys have grown up in a culture and like that, and because of that, for them to think that the Messiah is going to be delivered to die on the cross, the lowest, vilest form of execution in history. Rome did not just kill all prisoners on the cross. That was reserved for only the vilest of criminals. And it was so bad that if your relative died on the cross, you had no chance to an inheritance from that person. They could not be buried in public, which in Jewish culture was just horrific. Nobody could even imagine something like that. And so for these guys who have grown up in this shame-honor culture to think that God would allow the Messiah to die a shameful death, in their way of thinking, if God were to allow this would bring shame on Jesus, it would bring shame on them, it would bring shame on his family, it would bring shame on God. So God could not allow this. It's really hard for them to get this through their head. Even today, Islam has a real issue with this. This is one of the reasons that many of our Muslim friends have a hard time understanding the Jesus message from the Bible. They revere Jesus as a prophet. A lot of Christians don't even know that. Jesus is mentioned more in the Quran than Muhammad is. They revere him as a prophet. And so for us to say Jesus died, was buried, and rose again, whoa, I'm sorry, that does not compute. I don't get that. And so most of them believe that at the last moment, God put some substitute on the cross who died and rescued his son, because if Jesus really is divine, if Jesus really is the great prophet that they believe him to be, God in no way could ever allow him to die that type of a shameful death, because they haven't heard, obviously, the rest of the story that you and I understand and hold dear. But I'm using that as an example of why this would have been. It's easy for you and I, looking backward with a complete Bible in our hands, to understand what's going on. These guys don't have a complete Bible like we have. And so for them to capture this is like short circuit in their brain. It's like their hard drive has just crashed. To understand this is just way over their head. Now remember that what we're seeing here is connected to what we've already seen. This is not just some isolated story. And so let me tell you what I think is going on here. Okay, I underscore, this is what I think is going on. But I think it's a pretty good educated guess. And maybe after I've explained to you my reasoning here, you'll be able to understand what I think as well. I think that the reason that the disciples are fearful to ask Jesus about this, and I believe the reason they're over in the corner kind of struggling among themselves, and one of the clues here is what you find in verse 46. Would you look at that, where it says, but they were reasoning among themselves. Now, the reason I say that's a clue is because that's the translation of a Greek word that to this point Luke has used exclusively to talk about the doubting and skepticism of the enemies of Jesus. And now all of a sudden he's using that same word to talk about what Jesus' disciples are saying. Wow. Why would Luke use a word like that? We hear the word reasoning today in the 21st century, and we think, oh yeah, they're over in the corner, and they're talking about, well, this is logical, and that is logical, and what do you think, and I think. No. Luke is saying here, he's using this word in a different sense. What he's saying is these guys are not talking to Jesus, not because they're filled with this reverential awe, but because they're over in the corner filled with doubt and skepticism and arguing among themselves who's going to be the greatest. Here's what I think that is happening. I think that the disciples fear that Jesus has lost it. I think they feel that Jesus has weirded out on them, as we might say today. Jesus has gone too far. He has flipped out. He doesn't get it. Jesus has lost it. And so here they are over here arguing. So which one of us is going to take over the movement when Jesus is gone? Because obviously he's out of control. You ever felt like that about a friend? You ever had a friend at school? Those of you who are students, that all of a sudden one day they show up and it's like, who are you? And they just seem to have fallen off. You ever feel like that about your parents? Okay, not more than a couple of times a day probably. They just lost it. They just don't get it. They've got lost contact with reality. Maybe you've even told them that openly. Okay, good job. At least you're being honest and transparent. We like that. But the disciples are not that honest or transparent, are they? Instead of just saying, Jesus, man, you have totally flipped out. They get over in the corner and they start reasoning and their skepticism and doubt among themselves. And they're talking about which one of them is going to be the greatest, i.e., who's going to take over when Jesus is gone. He's become irrational. Maybe even dangerous to himself or others. I mean, he's talking about us going, what would you think? What would you think if one of your friends comes up to you guys and starts talking about, well, I'm going to be gone and you're going to be gone too. And you're thinking about checking out that person's computer, looking to see if they got, large amounts of fertilizer in their garage and, all this type of stuff. I mean, you're going to be worried. And so cut these guys some slack. This may be somewhat of the issue that they are struggling with. Maybe sometimes you think I go too far, talking about Jesus and suffering and all this stuff. Like, come on, man, we go to church to get, happy all the time. And you're talking about Jesus and suffering and taking up our cross and following him. Man, you just don't get it. You've gone a little bit too far. And we come to that conclusion either today or 2,000 years ago that maybe Jesus is asking too much of us. You ever feel like that? I don't mind going to church and all this type of stuff. And like the disciples, most of us have all the right answers. We can talk about his deity. We can talk about his virgin birth. We can talk about his death, burial, and resurrection. We can talk about all the things that the Bible teaches. And just as long as it doesn't cost me too much. Just as long as I'm not too terribly inconvenienced, I'll be okay in following him. Well, these guys, these disciples of Jesus, they had all the right answers too. Remember, they'd left all to follow him. They'd been with him, they'd heard him speak, they'd seen him work miracles, but they stumble when Jesus begins to challenge their worldview. Those basic underlying beliefs that lurk beneath the surface of our lives, and the thought that the Messiah would suffer such a shameful rejection, it just does not register with them. How could that be? So my point is simply this: Jesus hasn't lost it. This is the point when his disciples lose it. And because of that, they lose that connectivity with Jesus. For many of us, we're like this because we're made of the same human stuff that they were made of. And so when Jesus goes to meddling around with our underlying assumptions about life, and this is what I think, and it seems to me, and we've always heard it, and we've always done, and all this type of stuff, and Jesus goes to messing around with all of that, You know, we're fine to ask God to save us from hell. We're fine to even come to church once in a while. Some of us might even go so far as to give and to serve. And, okay, we can handle that. But we can pray to God. We can ask Him to bail us out of our messes. So far, so good. But for many of us, there comes a point when Jesus, in our way of thinking, asks too much. Oh, no. Now, I'll come to church, I'll serve, I'll even give once in a while, Jesus, but you're asking too much. Go to Baotao, China and teach English? Oh, isn't that a little extreme? And what happens here, at this point, when we as followers of Jesus reach this point where Jesus is asking too much, then what happens is, like Jesus' disciples, we become more of a hindrance to the kingdom instead of a help. I mean, how tragic is this? These are the guys that Jesus has invested himself in for a couple of years, and now there is such a disconnect that Jesus is going this way and they're pulling in the other way. Application thoughts, okay? We're made of the same stuff. Do we really think that we're not going to wrestle with these same issues? I mean, come on. Do we really think that we're any better than they are? Don't we understand that we have the same tendency to love power and position rather than learning to love well? I mean, we're learning to love well. It's a nice little thing that we throw out at church all the time. What does that really mean? Because for many of us, lurking beneath the surface is that desire that, I want to be recognized, I want power, I want position, and all of that. And when God begins to dig down deeply inside of us and wants to do that intense laser surgery on the inside of all of our beliefs and assumptions, that's when we begin to put on the brakes too. And please understand something. It's not about God wanting all of you to go to Baotao and teach English, to go to the other side of the world and be a missionary and leave your family and career and all. No. I don't believe that at all. God does, from time to time, separate specific gifted people to take the good news of Jesus Christ and learn to love well among other groups of people in other places, and we rejoice in that. It's always been that way. It will always be that way. But for the majority of us, what it means is for you and I to live the life of Christ exactly where God has placed us with the gifts and skills and ability and experiences that we have, learning to serve Him, learning to love well, learning to love Him, learning to love others, learning to love the least reached, learning to love the least of these, right where God has put us as business people, as school teachers, as pharmacists, as physicians, as factory workers, as truck drivers, whatever it is that you are, God wants you there. When we fail to understand how to love well and the purpose of pain and suffering that equips us to do that, that's when we tend to think that Jesus has pushed us too far. Well, certainly Jesus couldn't ask me to suffer. Well, maybe Jesus is not asking you to suffer. Maybe what Jesus is doing is taking advantage of the suffering that you're going to suffer anyway. There's nobody in life that doesn't suffer pain and suffering, right? Anybody? I asked you that question a couple of weeks ago. Know anybody ever made it through life without pain and suffering? No. But what God does, because He loves us, He takes that pain and suffering that comes from living in a world that is twisted by sin, and He uses that for His redemptive purposes in us and in others and in His entire creation. And He takes that pain and suffering and He recycles it. He makes us stronger and deeper and wiser and better in order that we might learn to love well. He's always done it that way. But when we put the brakes on and say, okay, Jesus, I'm not going any further than right here, when we get to that point, it's a very short step to what the disciples are doing. Well, I won't leave church. So we hang around and then we begin to play all the power and position games. As we sometimes say, play church, instead of learn to be a follower of Jesus. We all have that tendency. So what does Jesus do? How does Jesus handle that? You know what he does? He does what he many times does. He takes the social pyramid and he turns it on its head again. Now, what do you think he would do? Jesus, in verse 47, it says he perceives their thoughts. He knows what they're talking about. He's God, okay? You can get off in a corner and gossip, but he's there. He perceives your thoughts. Jesus has lost it. He's not thinking straight. He's irrational. He's been under too much pressure. His enemies are getting to him. We have to protect him. Who's going to take over? Jesus perceives their thoughts, and so while they're arguing about who's going to be the greatest, Jesus goes over and takes a child, unnamed child, maybe the same child he cast the demon out of a few minutes ago. We don't know. We're not told. He takes a child, and he takes this child, and he sets this child at his side. Now, in American contemporary culture, that may not say anything to you. But let me tell you, in the culture in which Jesus lived, when he did that, it brought a collective, and here's why. Jesus takes a child, ignored by everyone, and puts this child in what we would call the power position by his side. And then he makes this statement. Guys, let me tell you something. While you're over there arguing about who's going to be the greatest, let me just tell you, whoever receives this child in my name receives me. Busted. Nobody would ever think to do something like that. That is as unthinkable in that culture as Jesus saying, I'm going to be delivered to be crucified. Jesus continues to make these bold moves and statements totally outside the box, totally outside of everything that everybody knows and is comfortable with. And so when he puts this child in this position, and the word receive in verse 48, whoever receives this child is not just a casual word. In the Greek that Luke uses, it's a word that means to welcome, receive in the sense of receiving an ambassador, receiving someone of high honor. It's the same type of language that we saw in Luke chapter 7 when Jesus was invited to this banquet at the house of Simon the Pharisee. It was a setup to embarrass him, and when Jesus entered in, they offered him no water for his feet. They offered him no oil for his head. They did nothing that any host would do for a guest of honor. And Jesus called his hand on it. He had not been received. And so to receive someone in this sense is literally to accept them as equals or even above you in the social order. So Jesus was saying that children are not tomorrow's people, they are today's people. They are just as valuable as you guys in the corner arguing about who's going to be the greatest. Wow. Children, in this case, symbolize those on the margin of society. Last couple of weeks I've been talking about loving the least reached and loving the least of these. And by the least of these, we get it from this passage and one in Matthew where it talks about people on the margin of society. Let me take that passage in Matthew, by the way. Matthew chapter 25. Follow along with me, if you would, in verse 31, Matthew 25:31. When Jesus says in Luke 9:48, he that is least among you all, the same shall be great, reminds me very much of what Jesus says here in Matthew 25, beginning in verse 31. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And he shall set the sheep on his right hand, but the goats on the left. And then shall the king say unto them on his right hand, Come, you blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. Naked, you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, you came unto me. And then shall the righteous answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and fed you, or thirsty and gave you to drink? When we saw you a stranger and took you in, or naked and clothed thee? Or when saw we you sick or in prison and came unto you? And the king shall answer and say unto them, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you have done it unto one of the least of these my brothers, you have done it unto me. And then shall he say also unto them on the left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you gave me no food. I was thirsty, you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, you took me not in. Naked, you clothed me not. Sick and in prison, you visited me not. And then shall they also answer him, saying, Lord, when we saw you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, and did not minister unto you, then shall he answer them, saying, Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as you did it not to one of the least of these, you did it not to me. Are we, the church, willing to welcome those who are not the rich and powerful? That's the question. We support prison ministries in our church. We love to hear about people going into the jails and preaching. What about when people get out of prison or jail and come to our church? Former people who have been incarcerated. Are we just as happy to talk about that? We talk about rescuing people from human trafficking, but what when former prostitutes are sitting among you? Oh, and by the way, sometimes they do. Just thought I'd throw that out. Oh, and by the way, ex-cons, them too. They're sitting among you today. That make you uncomfortable? Sometimes I wonder if the Christianity that we practice would be recognized by Jesus. And Jesus is saying, when you receive people like this in my name, you're receiving me. And so this child is an emblem of that. Churches that love well are going to love the people on the margin of society, and they're going to love their children. Can I be honest with you? I'm not ragging on this church. I'm not scolding you. I'm just saying in all churches it seems like it's an eternal problem trying to find enough people to work with kids. Why? Because we don't think that kids are important. If we did, we'd be loving them well. I'm just saying. So we need about 8 leader-type people during this service to work with kids. Somebody that'd be willing to say, well, I don't like the music in the first service, I like it better in this service. Would you be willing to go to the first service and work with kids in the second? Well, I'm not sure. Maybe Jesus is asking me to go too far. It's always a struggle. There's always ways that we can do. I think we do a pretty good job, but we can do a much better job. You heard this morning about LCTC and working with immigrants, and in that we cooperate with the Jewish Vocational Center, and we also do things like work continuously with Raytown Emergency Assistance Program, City Union Mission. We mentor not only immigrants, but we host international students on a regular basis. We work with Veronica's Voice, that's dedicated to those who have been rescued from the sex trade. We work with CityLink and the Urban Core, transitional housing. We work with the River of Refuge, one of our neighbors here in this area, also dedicated to transitional housing. We work with Habitat for Humanity and a whole host of other things that I'm sure I can't even remember. Don't talk about it probably as much as we ought to, but we're going to start doing a little bit more because I think we can do a little bit better job of loving not only the least reach, but the least of those among us. It seems like the ways of God always shake us up. We're learning to love well sometimes, but what shakes us up is when we discover who it is that we're to learn well. That's the problem. I want to make sure that I'm in a small group where everybody is socially acceptable to me because I want to be able to love them well. And then maybe together we can learn to love God well. And I can even learn to tolerate some of the people I bump into at church that I don't really want to associate with. But then Jesus says, okay, so how about the ex-cons and the ex-prostitutes and the ex-addicts and what about the people who are just on the margin of society? What about the kids? Oh, Jesus, you're asking too much. You're asking too much. I know you guys remember, those of you who are students, maybe you're going through this right now. There's kids at school that are just awkward. Okay, or maybe you're one of those kids, okay? I'm seeing several of them. I think will qualify right now, just kind of glancing out there. And some of you just a little weird. But isn't it great when somebody at school reaches out? And can I confess, when I was a kid, I think it must have been 5th or 6th grade, I can't even remember, so long ago, we had a girl in our class named Phyllis. And Phyllis was one of those kids that was slow to grow up. Okay, can I say it that way? She seemed to us to be just weird. So I can remember in grade school, we would all run from Phyllis, and if Phyllis happened to touch any of us, we would talk about having Phyllis's cooties. Okay, they still use that word, okay? And so, we would run around, and everybody, hated to have Phyllis's cooties. And we would make fun of her. And I can remember my dad took me to play miniature golf one time, and Phyllis and her dad were there, and they were playing miniature golf, and Phyllis, just being normal weird Phyllis, came over to me, and I'm like with my golf club going, "Get away, get away!" And my dad had to, take me aside and, have a come to Jesus meeting with me before I'd even come to Jesus. And you know what happened to Phyllis? Phyllis grew up and became a delightful lady and married just a great guy and had a beautiful family and went on to have a perfectly normal, wonderful life. And I often think about that. I thought, of course, I wasn't a believer at the time, and I probably would have done the same thing, just tell you the truth. I think, wow, wouldn't it have been neat if some of us could have reached out to somebody like Phyllis and learned to love them well? Maybe she would have gotten her act together a little sooner. I don't know. That's what Jesus is saying here. From Nick and Stu, we learned last week of the need to house some of the students for Winterfest, trying to keep the cost down. And those of you who answer that call, and some of you already have, you're going to get more out of it than the students will. It's kind of like during Perspectives, just give a shout out to the whole church. We had 60 international students from all over the Spanish-speaking world, from as far away as Chile and Argentina, who came in for 8 days. And we had to find housing for them, and many of you responded. And most of them, I think, were in Spanish-speaking homes in our church, which was great and appropriate. But some of you who don't even speak Spanish, you had some of these students stay in your home, and you just had a blast. Even though you couldn't communicate linguistically, you found ways to do it. And again, you got more than they did. So thank you for that. You guys are awesome. I'm just saying we can do even more as time goes on. So rather than end up like Jesus' disciples arguing for power and position, we need to keep close to God, keep in communion with Him, listen to His words even when they go against the grain of what we've always thought and felt. Analyze them. What is He really saying? What do they really mean? And keep focused on the mission and ask yourself, am I helping or hindering the mission?